On October 26th, in the area of the abandoned house on East Main Street, an abandoned building, a passerby noticed a strange smell and an open door to the basement. Having gone down, he found a concrete floor, old furniture, and the body of a young woman. She was lying on her side, showing no signs of life. Emergency services were immediately called. At the scene, the police found the mutilated body of a woman. She had been killed with particular cruelty. Multiple stab wounds, signs of a struggle. The police immediately stated, "This was not an accident, not a robbery, and not a suicide. This was a murder committed with cold calculation." The suspect disappeared, and with him, the 17-year-old underage girl. Dear viewers, in the next video releases, you will find very intriguing and confusing cases, and in order not to miss them, be sure to subscribe to the channel and please like the video. Catherine Elizabeth Blauvelt, more often known as Katie, was born in South Carolina in 1994. Her friends and family described her as a bright, sincere person with a gentle character and boundless kindness. She grew up in a quiet area of Simpsonville, a small, cozy town where everyone knew each other. Katie's family was what they call good, quiet people. Her parents were deeply religious, and Katie learned from childhood to help others, to be patient, reserved, and open. These qualities attracted people to her, and she never lacked friends. At school, Katie was active and sociable, but did not strive for ostentatious popularity. She participated in volunteer initiatives, helped in the parish community, and also dreamed of becoming a teacher. She received a pedagogical education and has already started working at a local school as a teacher's assistant. Her sincere desire to help children, especially those who face difficulties in school or at home, made her a favorite among students and colleagues. She met John Blauvelt in high school. John was older, served in the army, gave the impression of a confident, purposeful man. Against the background of dreamy and soft Katie, he seemed reliable and mature. Their relationship developed rapidly. According to Katie's friends, at first she was sincerely in love. John was charismatic, protected her from problems, and seemed devoted. After school, when John was assigned to the army, they continued their relationship at a distance, and then got married. The wedding was modest, but with sincere joy. In the photographs from the ceremony, Katie shines, and John is reserved but attentive. At first, everything seemed calm. They rented a house, Katie continued to work at the school, and John to serve. However, after a few months, loved ones began to notice changes. Katie began to appear less often at events, had difficulty finding time for meetings, and most importantly, she seemed increasingly nervous and tired. She stopped sharing details of her personal life, as if she had closed herself off. It later turned out that the relationship between the spouses was far from ideal. John increasingly showed outbursts of aggression. He began to control who and when she communicated with, expressed dissatisfaction with her work, and even tried to limit her participation in church affairs. In the family circle, she sometimes mentioned quarrels, but always said that everything will work out, that this is temporary. A typical reaction of a woman who found herself in a relationship with an emotionally or physically dangerous partner. In 2016, Katie finally made a difficult decision. She began divorce proceedings. This decision was difficult for her. Despite the obvious signs of a toxic relationship, she still hoped for change. But, as often happens in such stories, the moment of separation turned out to be the most dangerous. The next few weeks were a real test for Katie. John did not want to accept her decision. He tried to regain control. He showed up unannounced, called, wrote, threatened. However, Katie did not back down. She filed for divorce, lived separately, continued to work, and tried to build a new, independent life. October 24, 2016 was a cloudy and unremarkable Monday for the residents of Simpsonville, a small town in South Carolina where life flows slowly and measuredly. For Katie Blauvelt, this day began as a normal workday. She left the house and went to school where she helped teach elementary grades. According to her colleagues, she was a little distracted, but overall, as always, polite, calm, and collected. No one noticed anything alarming. In the afternoon, Katie stopped communicating. She did not come home, did not answer calls, did not open messages. For her relatives, this was unusual. Katie always warned if she was late or changed her plans. At first, the family decided that something happened to the phone, or she simply fell asleep after work. But the alarm began to grow. Late in the evening, her parents reported their daughter missing to the police. The police responded quickly, considering that this was an adult, but extremely responsible young woman who had never disappeared without warning before. The next day, the police began searching. First, they checked Katie's house. Everything was in place. No signs of a break-in were found. The phone was silent. The car could not be found either. As the hours passed, it became clear. This was not an accidental disappearance. With each hour, the likelihood of bad news grew higher. The car also could not be found near the school or at her friends. First, they checked hospitals, then traffic accidents, but none of the databases yielded results. Friends began spreading information on social networks, hoping that someone had seen her after work. By nightfall, the search was expanded. They checked the nearest bus stops, shopping centers, cafes where she sometimes went. The parents hardly slept. They drove around the city, peered into the windows of their car in the hope of noticing a familiar silhouette. Meanwhile, school colleagues also joined the search. Some suggested checking the area around her school, others her old walking routes. Students wrote messages of support and asked how they could help. The morning of October 25th arrived, and Katie was still missing. By midday, her photo with the short caption "missing" had circulated on local news sites and social media groups. Her parents posted a video appealing for any information and asking Katie, if she saw this, to just let them know. One of her friends printed out dozens of flyers and began posting them at gas stations, grocery stores, and schools. Volunteers gathered at a makeshift headquarters in the parish church where Katie had previously helped with children's events. They set up a hotline and a table with a map of the city, marking possible directions she might have taken. Every hour brought more anxiety, but there was still hope. Everyone tried to think positively, believing that she was simply stuck somewhere, had turned off her phone, or was going through something she wasn't ready to talk about yet. By the evening of the second day, anxiety was everywhere in the city. Almost everyone who followed the local news even a little knew about her disappearance. In the stores where Katie often went, the salespeople immediately recognized her in the photos and asked if she had been found. One of the cafes where she went on weekends even hung a leaflet in the window with the words, "We are waiting for you, Katie." The police began checking the surveillance cameras along the main roads leading from the school to her house. Some neighbors recalled seeing her car in the evening, but no one could say exactly when. The police questioned everyone who had been in contact with her in recent days: friends, colleagues, parents, parishioners from her church. No one reported anything unusual. On the contrary, everyone emphasized how calm and focused she seemed on everyday affairs. Journalists began to take an interest in the case, and soon Katie's name appeared in regional news broadcasts. One of the stories showed an interview with her mother, who spoke in a trembling voice about her daughter and asked those who could see her to respond. Volunteers with badges and stacks of leaflets began to appear on the streets, which they handed out to passers-by. Posts with calls were distributed on social networks. "Please share, every repost can help." People who did not know her personally wrote words of support and expressed their willingness to help in the search. A prayer meeting was held in the church. The hall was full. The priest spoke about hope, about how important it is not to lose faith in difficult times. On the third day of the search, members of the volunteer group combed the forest belt outside the city. Katie loved to walk in nature, and some thought that she might have simply gone off to think. The police turned to drone owners for help, and aerial searches of hard-to-reach areas began. The parents hardly left the house, waiting for a call or a knock on the door that would bring at least some news. The hotline rang around the clock, but so far there was not a single confirmed lead. The silence was becoming heavier. People tried not to say their worst thoughts out loud, hoping that everything would end well. But there was already a feeling in the air. Something had gone wrong. On October 26th, in the area of the abandoned house on East Main Street, an abandoned building where teenagers sometimes gathered in the evenings, a passerby noticed a strange smell and an open door to the basement. Going down, he found a concrete floor, old furniture, and the body of a young woman. She was lying on her side, showing no signs of life. Emergency services were immediately called. At the scene, the police found the mutilated body of Katie Blauvelt. She had been killed with particular cruelty, multiple stab wounds, signs of a struggle. The police immediately stated, this was not an accident, not a robbery, and not a suicide. This was a murder committed with cold calculation. Moreover, the nature of the wounds and the overall picture made it clear. The killer knew the victim, acted with hatred, and possibly planned the crime in advance. The place where Katie's body was found was carefully cordoned off. Forensic experts worked until late at night, recording every detail. Shoe prints, microfibers on the concrete floor, remnants of biological materials. There was no light in the basement where she was found, only an old fluorescent lamp, scraps of insulation on the walls, and moldy boards. Investigators noted that the killer was most likely well acquainted with this place. He knew how to get there, and how to hide his tracks. Katie's car was soon found in another part of the city. Carefully parked, with no signs of a struggle. The equipment was immediately sent for examination. Fingerprints, some partially erased, were found on the steering wheel, door handle, and gear lever. Tiny bloodstains, hair, and most importantly, a shoe print matching the one later found in the basement, were found in the car. This gave the police their key lead. The police also soon found their first serious piece of evidence: a video recording from a CCTV camera at a nearby store. The recording showed a man matching John Blauvelt's description next to Katie's car. The recording was made just a few hours before the body was discovered. When the police tried to find John, they found that he had disappeared. Moreover, he was not the only one missing. Along with him, 17-year-old Hannah Thompson, an underage girl with whom John was reportedly in a romantic relationship despite their age difference, had disappeared. Her family reported her missing almost simultaneously with the start of the search for John. The people of Simpsonville were shocked. An Army recruiter, a man who worked with teenagers, who regularly visited schools, was involved in a heinous crime, and, in addition, ran away with an underage girl. This did not fit into the usual picture of life in a quiet southern town. While the country followed the news, the authorities increased their efforts. Federal warrants were issued. John was added to the wanted list of the U.S. Marshals Service, and the search covered several states. Now the situation took on an even more alarming tone. Police and federal agencies began a nationwide search. John Blauvelt became not just a suspect, he was charged with premeditated murder, illegal possession and use of weapons, and was also recognized as a deserter from the U.S. Army, since he left military service without permission without notifying the command. Following the discovery of Catherine Blauvelt's body and the disappearance of John Blauvelt along with minor Hannah Thompson, the investigation came under the control of not only local authorities, but also federal agencies. Over the first few days, the South Carolina State Police, the FBI, and the U.S. Marshals Service began a coordinated effort to establish the suspect's escape route. It was confirmed that John had withdrawn cash from a bank account the day before his disappearance, and had also turned off his cell phone, indicating a deliberate attempt to evade surveillance. Investigators searched John's home, rental car, and a motel where he had apparently stayed a few days before the murder. Items belonging to Katie were found there, as well as scraps of maps, lists of gas stations, and potential routes. The evidence indicated that the crime had been premeditated. In addition, John's phone, which was recovered through digital forensics, contained threatening messages to Katie, as well as disturbing messages sent to Hannah, in which he promised to go far away and start over. Meanwhile, Hannah Thompson's disappearance also caused a wide resonance. Her photo appeared in the National Database of Missing Persons, and emergency meetings with parents and students were held in schools in the region. It was soon confirmed that Hannah had not been kidnapped. She left with John of her own free will. But due to her age, she was considered a victim of illegal movement of a minor, which only worsened Blauvelt's legal situation. Information about Blauvelt was spread throughout the country. He was put on the federal wanted list, assigned the status of especially dangerous. Posters with his photo, in military uniform and without, appeared in post offices, gas stations, stores. Law enforcement agencies warned he could be armed and extremely dangerous. It is known that he had high physical fitness, good survival skills, and, importantly, experience in evading surveillance, acquired during his military service. The investigation reached a dead end for several months. The tracks of John and Hannah were lost somewhere between Georgia and Arkansas. Every now and then, there were reports from eyewitnesses. Someone allegedly saw a man similar to him in a grocery store. Someone claimed to have seen a couple in a trailer park. However, none of the versions were confirmed. Blauvelt remained a ghost on the roads of America, as if he had disappeared. Hannah did not contact her family during this period, and her whereabouts remained unknown, which caused doubly alarm, both about her safety and about whether she could have been an unwitting accomplice or witness. Katie's family did not stop fighting all this time. Her parents actively interacted with journalists, created social media pages to maintain interest in the case, published memories of Katie so that she would not become a faceless victim of statistics. The city held memorial events and marches calling for justice and the speedy capture of the criminal. Simpsonville became a place of shared grief and anxiety, where everyone felt that evil was closer than anyone could have imagined. For 6 long years, John Blauvelt's name remained in the federal database of wanted criminals. His face, sometimes in an army uniform, sometimes in civilian photos, appeared on the websites of human rights organizations, in programs about fugitives, on digital billboards along southern highways. But time passed, and the flow of information about him became less and less frequent, and the searches became more and more routine. The investigation did not stop, but it went on in the background, as if the world was slowly beginning to forget. And yet, someone did not forget. In the summer of 2022, a middle-aged man in Medford, Oregon, walked into a small dental clinic complaining of a toothache. He introduced himself as Benjamin Wallace, filled out a form, provided an address, and a social security number. The dentist didn't suspect anything out of the ordinary, but the clinic administrator noticed that the man was withdrawn, avoided eye contact, and most importantly, there was no social security number in the patient database. She contacted the local police, as is required by protocol when dealing with false information. This became the first seed in the chain of a future arrest. A few days later, Medford police ran a random background check on Wallace. They sent a request to the federal database and received an alarming match in photo recognition. The man who was getting dental work was 96% similar in appearance to John Blauvelt, an Army deserter and murder suspect who has been on the run since 2016. The automatic face-matching system found a match not only in the eyes and chin shape, but also in the location of the moles and the scar under the left ear. A special surveillance team began external surveillance. The man lived in a trailer on the outskirts of the city, got a job at an auto repair shop, and received cash. Neighbors described him as polite but aloof. No one knew where he was from, and he himself did not say. At work, they called him simply Ben. He did not use social networks, paid only in cash, and left no digital traces. All this only increased suspicion. Soon, the investigation received a warrant to covertly take fingerprints from objects he touched. Cans, tools left in the workshop. The prints were compared with those left in Katie Blauvelt's car. The match was unambiguous. Then the U.S. Marshals, together with the local police, decided to act. On the morning of July 12, 2022, at 5:47 a.m. local time, U.S. Marshals surrounded the mobile home where John lived. The operation was carried out with lightning speed. No sirens, no noise. One of the officers would later say, "He didn't even resist. He just opened the door, looked at us, and looked down. He knew it was over." He had fake documents, some cash, a knife in a backpack, and a cheap push-button phone without a SIM card. He was calm, almost apathetic, and didn't even ask who turned him in. After questioning at the station, it became clear. All this time he had been living under other people's names, moving between small towns, never staying anywhere for more than a few months. He spent the night in cars, in campgrounds, at construction sites, sometimes asking to go to private farmers' barns for food and work. He didn't use the internet, didn't call anyone, not even relatives. His trail finally went cold back in 2017, and only the intuition of one woman who noticed inconsistencies led to his exposure. But when John Hannah was arrested, Hannah was not with him. Their escape lasted several months. According to Hannah herself, later told to the investigation, they often spent the night in cars, ate cheap food, worked odd jobs. But John increasingly showed cruelty, not physical, but emotional. He became cold, suspicious, controlling. He forbade her to call home, to go out alone, checked her phone. He instilled fear in her. He said that if she left, she would be an accomplice, that she would be imprisoned, that no one would believe. Hannah began to understand that she had become a hostage. About 4 months after the escape, she finally decided to escape. After leaving Blauvelt, she hitchhiked to another part of the state, then contacted a distant relative who drove her home. Her family kept the details of her return secret. There was too much publicity, and they wanted to protect her from the press. She spent several months in isolation, undergoing therapy and not commenting. But 2 years later, secretly from the public, she finally agreed to cooperate with the investigation. It was Hannah who provided the critical testimony that later became part of the case. She described how John planned the escape, how he changed documents, how he talked about an area where no one would find us. She described his behavior in the days after Katie's disappearance. He was agitated, silent, sometimes panicked. Hannah said she feared for her life, but for a long time she did not understand what was really happening. Only later, after therapy, did she begin to understand the scale of the psychological pressure she was under. The investigation did not bring charges against her. She was a minor, deceived by an adult man who manipulated her trust. Psychologists who worked with her confirmed, Hannah was not an accomplice. She was a victim. After his arrest, Blauvelt was transported back to South Carolina, where he was formally charged with a number of serious offenses, including first-degree murder, illegal possession of a weapon, desertion, and charges related to the illegal movement of a minor. He was awaiting the trial that Katie's family had long sought. New data analysis methods, including behavioral pattern matching technology and the use of facial recognition databases, played a key role in his capture. One of the algorithms used in law enforcement agencies noted a match between a photograph of a suspect and a random facial scan from the local ORDMV database. This match became the starting point that led to his capture. Blauvelt's arrest was something of a moral victory for Kathy's family. Her mother said publicly, "We've waited 6 long years for this day. Justice is still to come, but at least now we know he will never hurt anyone again." Simpsonville held a memorial service for Kathy, free of anxiety and fear, now that the killer was behind bars. The city could finally breathe a sigh of relief. The trial of John Tufton Blauvelt began in the spring of 2023 in Greenville County, South Carolina. The case had gained publicity over the years, and the opening session was packed with reporters, federal officials, civil rights activists, and dozens of Simpsonville residents who had followed the story from the beginning. Despite the attention, however, the trial was not theatrical. Prosecutors focused on a clear, methodical presentation of the facts to ensure that the defense had no reason to doubt the validity of the charges. Prosecutors presented extensive evidence: surveillance footage, threatening messages, biological traces found in a rental car, and accounts from employees of motels where Blauvelt stayed in the days leading up to the murder. One of the key pieces of evidence was the testimony of Hannah Thompson, who was 23 at the time of the trial. She personally confirmed that John not only planned the escape in advance, but also repeatedly said that Katie had ruined his life and had to answer for it. These words, recorded in her testimony, became the central argument of the prosecution in proving the premeditation of the crime. Blauvelt's defense tried to use classic tactics, questioning the mental state of the accused, talking about the pressures of military service, emotional instability, stress after the breakup of the marriage. However, the court did not accept arguments about temporary insanity. The circumstances of the case, cold-blooded murder, concealment of the body, flight with a minor, use of false documents, and years of evading justice, pointed too clearly to conscious, deliberate actions. The hearing lasted for several weeks. Every day, Katie's parents were in the courtroom, and every day they silently watched as a chain of evidence was built against the man who took their daughter from them. When John first looked at them in the courtroom, Katie's mother didn't look away. She simply held the photograph of her daughter in her hands and didn't flinch. That silent scene became a symbol of the whole story. Silent strength against ruthless violence. May 31st, 2023. The jury returned after 8 hours of deliberation. People held their breath as the foreman entered the room. The judge asked everyone to stand. The piece of paper in the juror's hand trembled slightly. There was no tremor in his voice, however. On the charge of first-degree murder, found guilty. On the charge of unlawful possession of a weapon during the commission of a felony, found guilty. A heavy but cleansing silence fell over the courtroom. Someone in the back sobbed. John Blauvelt's expression did not change. He nodded once, almost imperceptibly, and lowered his head. The judge asked the parties to remain seated and immediately began to read the sentence. In view of the gravity of the crime, the circumstances, and the lack of remorse on the part of the defendant, the court imposes a sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Pause. Additionally, 25 years for the related charge. The sentences are to be served consecutively. An appeal does not stay the execution. The judge's words sounded like formalities, but for Katie's parents, it was the end of a long, painful chapter. Her mother lowered her head and cried, the first time she had done so openly in the entire trial. Her father put his hand on her shoulder. There was no relief on their faces. No. There was exhaustion and silence. The same silence that comes after a storm, when everything has been destroyed, but finally you don't have to hold on with all your might. As the guard stood behind Blauvelt, he looked out into the courtroom one last time. No one looked back. Not a single glance. He walked out with his head down and never looked back. Later, already at the exit, the prosecutor would say into the microphones, "We can't bring Katie back. But today is the day of justice. Today she won."